Rome didn't fall in a single day. There was no final battle that ended everything. In fact, most Romans never believed their empire was collapsing. The roads still worked. The army still marched. The currency still existed. The empire still looked powerful. But one quiet decision changed everything. A decision that allowed Rome to look strong, while becoming weak underneath. And here's the uncomfortable truth. That same decision is being repeated today, not in Europe, not in Asia, but in the United States of America. Different century, different technology, same underlying mistake. This video is not about predicting doom. It's about understanding patterns. Because empires don't collapse from invasion first. They collapse from internal decisions that feel reasonable, until it's too late. And Rome's most dangerous decision wasn't about war. It was about money, power, and control. To understand Rome's fall, we need to go back to the moment Rome chose expansion over stability. By the 2nd century AD, Rome ruled more territory than any empire before it, from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the Middle East, but controlling an empire that large was expensive, very expensive. Rome had 3 massive costs: a permanent professional army, infrastructure across continents, a growing bureaucracy to manage everything. At first, Rome paid for this the traditional way: taxes. War spoils trade. But eventually, the math stopped working. Rome faced a choice: reduce commitments or find a way to fund the empire without admitting weakness. They chose the second. And this is where the fatal decision began. Rome's currency problem. Instead of raising taxes too aggressively or shrinking the empire, Roman leaders did something clever and dangerous. They debased their currency. Roman coins were originally made of silver. Over time, emperors quietly reduced the silver content and replaced it with cheaper metals. The coin looked the same. The stamp was the same. The empire told people, nothing has changed. But something had changed. The money was no longer backed by real value. This allowed Rome to pay soldiers, fund wars, maintain the illusion of strength without solving the underlying problem. At first it worked, just like debt works. At first. The illusion phase. This is important. For decades, Rome appeared stable. Markets still functioned, the army still fought, the empire still expanded. Most citizens didn't notice anything wrong, and that's the most dangerous phase of collapse. Because systems don't break when people panic, they break when people feel safe. By the time inflation became obvious, Rome was trapped. Raising taxes caused unrest, cutting the army invited invasion, fixing the currency required admitting failure. So Rome kept choosing the short-term solution. Again, and again, and again. Why this matters for America, setup only. If this story feels uncomfortable, it should, because America today faces a similar choice: massive global commitments, enormous military spending, a system dependent on confidence in its currency. And just like Rome, the solution has been to delay pain, not remove it. But we're not there yet. Rome didn't collapse the moment it debased its currency. That's the part most people misunderstand. The real damage came later, when people stopped trusting the system. And trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. Inflation wasn't the real killer. As Roman coins lost silver content, prices slowly rose. At first, merchants adjusted. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Citizens complained. Well, no, but life continued. So Rome made another decision. They froze prices. The state declared what things should cost instead of letting markets decide. Sound familiar? Price controls were supposed to protect ordinary people, but they did the opposite. Farmers stopped bringing goods to cities. Merchants hid supplies or sold them illegally. Black markets exploded. Rome had money everywhere, but nothing to buy. That's when people realized something terrifying. The currency still existed, but the system behind it no longer worked. The army became a financial problem. Rome's army was its backbone, but soldiers didn't fight for ideology. They fought for pay, land, and stability. As inflation rose, soldiers demanded more, the state printed more, the currency weakened further. Eventually, Rome couldn't afford loyalty, so it started recruiting mercenaries, outsiders with no emotional attachment to Rome. This changed everything. The army stopped being a protector of the system and became a cost center, draining it. An empire that can't trust its own army is already finished. It just doesn't know it yet. Bureaucracy replaced productivity. To manage chaos, Rome expanded its bureaucracy. More officials, more paperwork, more rules. Productive citizens, farmers, traders, craftsmen, carried the burden. Meanwhile, elites found ways around the system. This created a fatal divide. Those inside the system, those trapped under it. When too many people stop believing effort leads to reward, a society quietly gives up. Not with riots, not with rebellion, with withdrawal. The American parallel. This is the warning. Now zoom out. America today runs persistent deficits, funds global military commitments, relies on confidence in its currency, expands regulation when stress appears. Just like Rome, the system still functions. Stores are open, markets trade, the dollar still dominates, which is exactly why people say, this time is different. That sentence has preceded every major collapse in history. Rome didn't fall because it was attacked. It fell because confidence died first and power followed later. The point most people miss. Collapse doesn't look like destruction at first. It looks like short-term fixes. Delayed consequences, systems held together by belief. Rome survived centuries after its fatal decision. But it never recovered. Because once trust breaks, printing, laws, and force can't replace it. By the time Rome realized something was wrong, it was already too late to reverse course. Not because solutions didn't exist, but because leaders chose the wrong ones. This is the phase where empires don't collapse quietly. They double down. Rome's most dangerous decision. Rome had a choice. Scale back commitments, reduce military pressure, let the economy breathe. Instead, it did the opposite. It expanded. More borders to defend, more soldiers to pay, more provinces to control. Why? Because shrinking felt like weakness. And no empire ever believes it's allowed to look weak. So Rome borrowed from the future. Again, debt replaced reform. Instead of fixing structural problems, Rome used financial tricks. More debased coins, more emergency taxes, more forced labor, more state control. These weren't long-term solutions. They were confidence theater. The system looked strong on paper while rotting underneath. That's the most dangerous illusion an empire can create. Power became performance. Rome began ruling by display, not stability. Grand buildings, massive armies, public spectacles, all designed to send one message: we are still in control. But power that must be constantly displayed is power that's already slipping. Real strength doesn't need to be announced. The modern mirror. Look at modern America. When stress appears, spending increases, commitments expand. Influence is projected harder, not smarter. Pulling back is framed as decline. Restraint is framed as weakness. So the system does what Rome did. It postpones pain instead of reducing it. Why this phase is irreversible. Once an empire reaches this stage, every option looks bad. Cut spending leads to unrest. Raise taxes leads to stagnation. Print money leads to inflation. Pull back globally leads to loss of prestige. So leaders choose the option that buys time. And time is the most expensive currency of all. Rome didn't collapse overnight. It collapsed because it survived too long in denial. The core pattern empires don't fall because they fail. They fall because they refuse to change. Rome's final mistake wasn't economic. It was psychological. It believed past success guaranteed a future control power, could substitute for trust. Expansion could solve internal decay. History disagrees. This is the part most people get wrong. They imagine empire collapse as chaos, riots, revolutions, flags burning in the streets. That's not how Rome fell. And that's not how modern empires decline either. They don't fall loudly. They shrink quietly. The slow death of Rome. By the time Rome was truly collapsing, most Romans didn't even realize it. There was no single moment when people said, the empire is over. Life just changed. Roads weren't repaired anymore. Soldiers were paid late. Trade became local instead of global security. Depended on private protection, not the state. Rome didn't vanish. It stopped being Rome. Why people don't revolt. Because collapse isn't sudden pain, it's gradual inconvenience, and humans adapt frighteningly fast. Rome's citizens didn't rise up because food still arrived, less reliably, money still worked, less effectively, authority still existed, less competently. That less is the key. People don't revolt when life worsens slightly. They revolt when systems break instantly. Rome never gave them that moment. The psychological trap. Rome's leaders believed as long as armies marched, coins circulated, laws were written. The empire still existed, but empires don't survive on symbols. They survive on trust. Trust that. The system will be fair tomorrow. The currency will hold value. The future will be better than the present. Once that trust erodes, collapse is already underway. The modern parallel. Ask yourself this. Has America collapsed? No. But has it changed? Absolutely. Wealth gaps widen quietly. Public trust declines slowly. Institutions lose legitimacy gradually. People plan individually, not collectively. This isn't panic. This is adaptation. Exactly what happened in late Rome when empires become personal. Here's the moment that matters most. When citizens stop asking, How do we fix the system? And start asking, how do I protect myself from it? Rome reached that moment. So did the Soviet Union. And modern America is closer to it than most people admit. The final illusion. Empires think collapse looks like rebellion. In reality, it looks like lower expectations, smaller ambitions, reduced faith in institutions, a quiet acceptance that the past won't return. By the time elites realize what's happening, the empire is already gone in everything but name. Rome wasn't conquered in a single moment. It was outgrown by reality. By the final centuries, Rome still had emperors, Rome still had armies, Rome still had laws, but it no longer had control. Local powers mattered more than Rome. Private loyalty mattered more than citizenship. Economic survival mattered more than ideology. Rome didn't fall. It became irrelevant. And that is far more dangerous than collapse. The final stage. Every empire reaches. Every empire eventually enters the same phase, the cost of control greater than the benefit of control. At that point, power becomes defensive, not visionary. Policy becomes reactive, not strategic. Leaders manage decline instead of preventing it. Rome reached that phase. So did Britain. So did the Soviet Union. And history says no empire escapes it forever. America's ending won't look like Rome's movies. There will be no burning capital, no invading armies, no single collapse year. Instead, it looks like this. Global influence becomes selective allies hedge instead of follow institutions survive, but inspire less economic strength exists, but feels fragile. The future feels narrower than the past. That's not collapse, that's contraction. Why this is so hard to accept. Because America still feels powerful, and Rome felt powerful too, until it didn't. The most dangerous moment for any empire is when it still wins, still spends, still dominates, but no longer adapts fast enough. Rome didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because it was slow in a faster world. Empires don't end with catastrophe. They end with transition, power shifts, systems rebalance, influence spreads instead of concentrates. America doesn't fall. It becomes one power among many, not the system itself. That's not failure. But it feels like one to people who grew up at the peak. Rome teaches us this. The most important question isn't, will America collapse? It's, can America adapt faster than its own momentum? Because empires don't die when enemies defeat them. They fade when history outpaces them. This isn't anti-America. It's not pro-anyone else. It's pro-pattern. Because history doesn't punish nations for being evil. It punishes them for being unchanged. If you want to understand power before it shifts, not after textbooks explain it, subscribe to the channel.